Hi, I am Lark Orvick-Moore, and I am excited to read to you Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This book shows Virginia Woolf's method of writing as stream of consciousness as she tells you about a single day in the life of a lady aristocrat who is getting ready for a party in the 1920s. Hope you enjoy. Virginia Woolf was born in 1882, the daughter of Julia Jackson Duckworth and Victorian scholar Sir Leslie Stephen. It was after Virginia's 1912 marriage to Leonard Woolf that she began to publish her major work. Her first novel was The Voyage Out in 1915. Woolf is admired for her contributions to literary criticism in general and to feminist criticism in particular. This was particularly noted in A Room of One's Own in 1929. She was a victim of lifetime mental illness. Woolf committed suicide in 1941. She left her literary legacy and Hogarth Press, which established such influential writers as T.S. Eliot, James Joyce, and Catherine Mansfield. Now enjoy a cutting from Mrs. Dalloway, pages 165 to 170. Lucy came running full tilt downstairs, having just nipped into the drawing room to smooth the cover, to straighten a chair, to pause for a moment and feel whoever came in must think how clean, how bright, how beautifully cared for when they saw this beautiful silver, the brass fire irons, the new chair covers, and the curtains of yellow chintz. She appeared and appraised each, and heard a roar of voices. Oh, people already coming up for dinner. She must fly. The Prime Minister is coming, Agnes said. So she had heard them say in the dining room, she said, coming in with a tray of glasses. Did it matter? Did it matter in the least? One Prime Minister more or less. It made no difference at this hour of the night to Mrs. Walker among the plates, the saucepans, colanders, frying pans, chicken with aspic, ice cream freezers, pared crust of bread, lemon soup tureens, and pudding bases, which, however hard they washed up in the scullery, seemed to be all about her and on top of her, on the kitchen table, in the chairs, and while the fire blared and roared, the electric lights glared, and still supper had to be laid. All she felt was, one Prime Minister, more or less, made no scrap of a difference to Mrs. Walker. The ladies were coming upstairs already, said Lucy, and the ladies were going up, one by one, Mrs. Dalloway walking last and almost always sending back some message to the kitchen. My love to Mrs. Walker. That was one night. Next morning they would go over the dishes, the soup, the salmon. Mrs. Walker knew, as usual, it was underdone, for she always got nervous about the pudding and left it to Jenny. So it happened the salmon was always underdone. But some lady with a fair hair and silver ornaments had said, Lucy said, about the entree, was it really made at home? But it was the salmon that bothered Mrs. Walker, as she spun the plates round and around and pulled out the dampers, and there came a burst of laughter from the dining room. The voices speaking, then another burst of laughter, the gentlemen enjoying themselves when the ladies had done. The Tokay, said Lucy, running in to Mrs. Dalloway, had sent for the Tokay from the Emperor's cellars, the Imperial Tokay. It was borne through the kitchen. Over the shoulder, Lucy reported how Miss Elizabeth looked quite lovely, and she couldn't take her eyes off of her, in her pink dress, wearing a necklace Mrs. Dalloway had given her. Jenny must remember the dog, Miss Elizabeth's fox terrier, which, since it bit, had to be shut up, and it might want something. Jenny must remember that dog. But Jenny was not going upstairs with all those people about. There was a motor at the door already. There was the ring at the bell, and the gentleman still in the dining room drinking Tokay. There. They were all going upstairs. That was the first to come, and now they would come faster and faster. So as Mrs. Parkinson, hired for parties, would leave the hall door ajar, and the hall would be full of gentlemen waiting. They stood waiting, sleeking down their hair, while the ladies took their coats off on the room along the passage, where Mrs. Barnett helped them. Old Ellen Barnett, who had been with the family for 40 years and came every summer to help the ladies, and remembered mothers when they were girls, and though very unassuming, did shake hands, said "Milady" very respectfully, yet had a humorous way with her, looking at the young ladies and ever so tactfully helping Lady Lovejoy, who had some trouble with her underbodice, and they could not help feeling that Lady Lovejoy and Miss Alice, that some privilege in the matter of brush and comb were awarded them for having known Mrs. Barnett. 30 years ago, my lady, Mrs. Barnett supplied her. Young ladies did not use rouge, said Lady Lovejoy, when she had stayed at the Borton in the old days. And Miss Alice didn't need rouge, said Mrs. Barnett, looking at her fondly. There Mrs. Barnett would sit in the cloakroom, patting down the furs and smoothing out the Spanish shawls, tidying the dressing table, and knowing perfectly well, in spite of the furs and the embroideries, which were nice ladies and which were not. "The dear old body," said Lady Lovejoy, mounting the stairs, Clarissa's old nurse. And then Lady Lovejoy stiffened. "Lady and Miss Lovejoy," she said to Mr. Wilkins, who was hired for parties. He had an admirable manner, and he bent and straightened himself, and announced with perfect impartiality, "Lady and Miss Lovejoy, Sir John and Lady Needham, Miss Weld, Mr. Walsh." His manner was admirable, and his family life must have been irreproachable, except that it seemed impossible that, being a greenish lip and shaven cheeks, could have blundered into the nuisance of children. "How delightful to see you," said Clarissa. She said it to everyone. "How delightful to see you." She was at her worst, effusive and insincere. It was a great mistake to have come, and he should have stayed at home and read his book, thought Peter Walsh. Should have gone to the music hall. He should have stayed at home, for he knew no one. "Oh, dear, it's going to be a failure, a complete failure," Clarissa felt it in her bones, as dear old Lord Lexing stood there apologizing for his wife, who had caught a cold at Buckingham Palace garden party. She could see Peter out of the tail of her eye, criticizing her, there in that corner. Why, after all, did she do these things? Why seek pinnacles and stand drenched in fire? Might it consume her somehow? Burn her to cinders? Better anything, better brandish one's torch and hurl it to the earth than taper and dwindle away like some old Ellie Henderson. It was extraordinary how Peter put her into these states just by coming and standing in a corner. He made her feel and see herself, exaggerate. It was idiotic. But why did he come? Why just merely to criticize? Why always take and never give? Why not risk one's one little point of view? There he was, wandering off, and she must speak to him. But she would not get the chance. Life was that humiliation, renunciation. What Lord Lexham was saying was that his wife would not wear her furs at the garden party because, "My dear, you ladies are all alike." Lady Lexham being 75 at least. It was delicious how they petted each other, the old couple. She did like Lord Lexham. She did think it mattered. Her party. It made her feel quite sick to know that it was all going wrong and all falling flat. Anything, any explosion, any hoarder, as better than people wandering aimlessly, standing in a bunch at the corner like Ellie Henderson, not even caring to hold themselves upright. Gently, the yellow curtain with all the birds of paradise blew out, and it seemed to as if they were in flight of wing into the room, right out, then sucked back, for the windows were open. Was it draughty, Ellie Henderson wondered? She was subject to chills, but it did not matter that she should come down sneezing tomorrow. It was the girls and their naked shoulders she thought of.
being trained to think of others by an old father, an invalid, late vicar of Borden. But he was dead now, and her chills never went to her chest. Never. It was the girls she thought of, the girls with their bare shoulders, and herself having always been a wisp of a creature, with her hair thin and meager profile, though now, past 50, there were beginning to shine through some mild beam, something purified in distinction of years, and obscured again, perpetually, by her distressing gentility, her panic fear, and arose of with only 300 pounds of income, and her weaponless state. She could not earn a penny, and it made her timid, and more disqualified year after year to meet well-dressed people who did this sort of thing every night of the season, merely telling their maids, "I'll wear so-and-so." Whereas Ellie Henderson ran out nervously and bought cheap pink flowers, 6, and then threw a shawl over her old black dress, for her invitation to Clarissa's party had come at the last moment. She was not quite happy about it. She had the sort of feeling that Clarissa had not meant to ask her this year. Why should she? There was no reason, really, except that they had always known each other. Indeed, they were cousins, but naturally they had rather drifted apart, Clarissa being so sought after. It was an event for her going to a party. It was quite a treat to see the lovely clothes. Wasn't that Elizabeth grown up with her hair done in a fashionable way in a pink dress? Yet she could not be more than 17. She was very, very handsome. But girls, when they first come out, didn't seem to wear white as they used. She must remember everything and tell Edith. Girls wore straight frocks, perfectly straight, with white skirts and well above the ankles, and it's not becoming, she thought. Thank you for listening.